To make the filling for the sausage plait, what you will need is 1 onion, 200 grams of sausage meat. So we've got 200 grams of sausage meat, 1 onion, chopped, bacon, a rasher of bacon chopped up, 2 to 3 mushrooms chopped, and 2 hard-boiled eggs. Now you can leave, if you don't like a filling, you can leave the hard-boiled eggs out and put in some chopped pepper. So to chop the eggs, generally, I would put them through a slicer like so, turn it round and put it through again. Okay, so that actually gets the egg chopped up quite quickly, quite nicely. Okay, so with it, if you put an egg in there, it's a bit like having a sort of I suppose, a cooked breakfast type of filling. Okay, so that's the chopped egg, 200 grams of sausage meat, 1 chopped onion. Okay, so we've got that in there. A slice of bacon chopped. Now my recipe does also suggest 2 to 3 tomatoes chopped up. I haven't put that in this time. I'm putting some herbs in, so I like to have quite herby. You could put some chopped garlic in if you wanted to. It does actually say to put in a dash of sauce, so I'm going to put barbecue in. You could use tomato sauce, or you could, so that's a dash of sauce, mushrooms going in, and the sausage meat. Which is approximately half of this pack. Now sometimes I actually use the whole pack of sausage meat and then reserve some of the filling and turn it into sausage rolls. See how this mixes. And the easiest way to really mix it all together is just to get your hands in there, making sure obviously that your hands are washed beforehand. Now I'm going to use all of this sausage meat because it's come out of my freezer, and what I don't want to do is to find that I've wasted it. I can't refreeze it. It's not, once you've defrosted something, you can't refreeze it raw. It would have to be cooked in between. So I will, if I've got too much filling, I will keep it and then turn it into some sausage rolls. Okay, we'll use it in some way, pasty filling, whatever, in order to use it up. So just get your hands in there, don't be afraid to. You can put a little bit of salt and pepper in here if you want to. Okay, and that's basically your filling for a sausage plait. You can do a vegetarian alternative. That would use 150 grams of cheddar cheese grated, 1 chopped onion. I would suggest that you put a raw egg in, unless you're not able to eat egg. Put a raw egg in to help hold it all together. Otherwise, the filling tends to sort of be very bitty, and it melts all over the place. 1 red or green pepper chopped, and 2 to 3 mushrooms, and again seasoning with herbs, salt and pepper. You could put a little dash of sauce in there as well, like tomato or barbecue or brown sauce. Okay, so that's the filling. I'm going to put that in the fridge to chill until I've dealt with my pastry. In a previous video, I demonstrated how to make puff pastry. Now I'm going to actually turn that into a plait. And it was frozen pastry, so I've defrosted that overnight in the fridge and allowed it to then stand at room temperature for 10 to 15 minutes before using it, so that it's not too hard to handle. Now with puff pastry, what I do is actually I roll it out again like we did when making it. So I'll roll that out and do a roll and fold, and do that once or well, about 2 times really. Okay, and that just adds a few more layers, remembering to dust flour on your worktop and keep the pastry moving, and don't forget to quarter turn it and seal it. Okay, so just dab it out and roll it. Okay, then that's ready to use. Now what I'm going to do is roll it out to the size of the tray so that I've got it easy to use. You can actually do one large plait or do two smaller plaits that could then be portioned. You could do individual portions. You could cut the pastry into quarters and then do individual pastry plaits as well. Portion sized, depends really what you're doing it for. Okay, what the scenario is. Or you can do one large one and then cut portions from there. Okay, now if you need to transport it once made, it's probably easy to deal with smaller parts. Okay, smaller plaits, rather than dealing with one large one that you've then got to try and cut to transport if you're cooking it to take to somebody's house. Okay, so we want it about the size of the paper. And you're trying to keep it a good even thickness. Okay. And then I'm going to pop that onto my baking parchment. You don't need to necessarily grease baking parchment, but also with this pastry, I wouldn't be greasing it anyway, because there's a high proportion of fat in there. Now to move it, you can either lift it like I am now, or you can put it over your rolling pin to lift. Okay, it's either way. I'm going to place that on there and spread that out. Okay. Now what I've got is enough now for two plaits. So just wipe the worktop down as you go, so that you're not going to end up with butter or flour stuck to the bottom of the baking tray. Okay. Then cut that in half. So I'm going to do two plaits. So I'm going to cut that in half. Okay. So I'm going to have two of those, and I'm going to split the filling between the two. Now, what you will do is actually cut your strips. I'm trying to keep them even on both sides. We do this on the tray, and you have to do it carefully so that you're not cutting through onto the tray, because some knives will actually mark your baking tray, and you don't want to ruin a good baking tray doing this. Try and keep it even. You can work to a template if you wanted to make one. But you want an even number of cuts. Okay, same on the other one. Okay. Now, when you're rolling out your pastry, you need to treat it like you did when you made it. So keep everything cold. Try not to handle it too much. Okay. So that's all ready for the filling to go in. So now what I'll do is actually divide the filling up. So divide my filling up into two. And you just put that down the centre. Now you can do a vegetarian one. You could change the filling. You don't have to stick to the ingredients that you might read from a recipe. You could actually change them up a little bit, put more vegetables in, leave the egg out if you don't like the idea of the egg going in. It's really down to you to sort of put your own spin on it, really. Okay, I've got the raw bacon in there. I haven't cooked it beforehand because it's not necessary. So the best way to do this is just to get it shaped. Just put it down the middle. Okay. Shape it in. Vegetarian filling is a little bit more difficult to handle because it tends to break up. Make sure your hands are clean, obviously, because if they're not, then you're going to risk cross-contamination, and nobody wants to be made ill, or nobody wants to make anybody ill when they're cooking. Okay. So that's that. Okay. Just need to wash my hands. To seal my filling in, I need to just use water as a glue down the side of the pastry. Okay. And brush that around. Just use that like so. Right, just bring that filling in nice and tight. Again, wash my hands. And what I tend to do is to actually take the top each end ends up with a lot of pastry for whoever's eating it. So I tend to take those bits off and just throw those away. Wrap the pastry round and then plait. Okay, by bringing the bits over. Because you've wet the edges, they should then join in the middle. Okay, quite nice. You want to overlap them. That's as near as a plait you're getting. You're not twisting and whatever. Just keep the shape going as you go. And it's important that when you roll the pastry from being chilled that you do keep those layers in there, because if you start to actually rough the pastry around and forget what you're dealing with, you'll end up with your pastry without any layers, and you want to see the nice lamination. So when this is cooked, I'll be able to show you those. Okay, so I've cut slightly uneven here. What I'm going to do is to cut that off. Okay, get rid of that. Get rid of that, because the person who gets the end piece doesn't want to have a mouthful of pastry. Okay, and then just tuck that nicely around the edge. Right, so that's one plait done. You can plait in the opposite direction if you want, see if that actually makes a difference. So cut the end off again. Wrap that round. And then bring it a different direction, so you can see whether that makes any difference whatsoever. It's up to you. It doesn't. I don't think it really makes a massive difference which way you go. Keep the sides in, keep it shaped. Okay. Try and get them overlapping. And keep going. Cut the end bit off again. Get rid of that. And seal your filling in. Alright, so that's now ready to go in the oven. It just needs to be glazed and popped in the oven. To finish your plait off, ready to go in the oven and bake, you need to mix. You can glaze it with either milk or beaten egg. What I've done is actually combined beaten egg and milk, so I'm going to use both and just brush that on. Get all round the sides. You want to get a good coating. All over. Okay, so really well glazed. Now we haven't applied any grease to anything here because a lot of fat will come out of this during cooking, because if you remember that this pastry has a high proportion of fat. So we've used our puff pastry from before, having made it before. Make sure those. There we go. So using the puff pastry is far better for a plait because it has that lamination. So you have this, it's a really lovely pastry to show off the layering and lamination that you achieve while making it. Okay, but it is a high fat, the sausage meat is high in fat content, and the pastry itself is high in fat. You could change the filling and use chopped chicken, okay, and make up a different combination of ingredients for the filling, all right, or do a vegetarian filling, all right. So that's glazed. That will go into the oven on 220 degrees that's gas mark 7, for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, turn the oven down to 200, gas mark 6, and cook it for a further 15 to 20 minutes. Because I've done 2 small plaits rather than 1 large plait, it could I would anticipate it taking a reduced time to cook it overall, because obviously if you're reducing the size, the portion size of it all, the cooking time will automatically drop slightly. Okay, so I'm going to pop those in the oven and then show you when they come out. Now that's been in for 15 minutes and you can see that it's started to go golden brown, so we want to drop the temperature, and it's still though oily. However, it's still oily in places and a little bit patchy, sort of looking sort of greasy, and not too much, surprisingly, not too much fat has come out of it. It can end up with quite a pool of fat underneath it. Okay, so that good brushing of the egg has managed to hold everything in, which is great. So that's going to go back into the oven, and it should go back in for about 15 to 20 minutes on a lower temperature, 200 degrees. That's gas mark 5, for about 15 to 20 minutes. But because these are smaller, I think this will be done in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to pop it back in. And I just want to point out just how nice the glaze is when you use an egg and milk glaze. Okay, so it's going back in, and I'll show you what happens when it comes back out again. Right, the sausage plait's now come out. It had a further 15 to 20 minutes in the oven, and that finished it off nicely. It was a lower temperature so that the pastry didn't burn. Okay, if the pastry was starting to go too brown too quickly, what you could do is actually just put a piece of baking parchment across the top to help save that. Okay, but what you need to do is to use a fish slice or an easy lifter. A fish slice is generally good enough to transfer your food from your baking tray onto your cooling tray. Remember always, when you're using the baking tray, you're taking it out of the oven, to use a heat-proof mat to put your baking tray on to protect your worktop. So a wooden triangle or a wooden square base would do that job. And then once you take it out of the oven, you transfer it then from your baking tray onto the cooling tray to allow cool air to chill it, to cool it down, ready to store, take home, do whatever, take to somebody's house if you're going to share it, you're contributing as part of a meal, or if you're eating it straight away, straight onto a nice plate, surrounded by some salad, garnish, a little bit of parsley across the top, some sliced or twisted tomato and things like that, and it would be presented beautifully, and it is really nice. This could be 3 portions. So if I'd taken one big plat, you'd get many portions out of it. Okay, I've only transferred one because that can be eaten today. The other one, now that the meat has been cooked, if you remember earlier I said that I wouldn't leave the sausage meat and just use half the pack. I used the whole pack because I couldn't refreeze the raw meat for hygiene purposes, because once you actually defrost something you can't refreeze it without it being cooked in between, and that's exactly what I've done, is I've cooked it in between, and now I'm actually going to use one and eat that as part of a family meal, and then the other one that I made will go in the freezer for another time, and it's perfectly safe to freeze that because the meat's been cooked in between. Okay, so bon appetit, enjoy your plat.